Beneath the sands of worlds long since abandoned, beneath oceans that have not felt sunlight in 60 million years, something ancient waits. It does not dream, because dreaming requires a mind that still remembers what it once was. It does not decay, because it was never alive in the way that word is commonly understood. For eons it has lain still, wrapped in stone and silence, while empires rose above it, flourished and fell into dust, entirely unaware of what slept beneath their feet. Then, on scattered worlds across the galaxy, the silence broke. Tombs older than the oldest human record began to open. Metal figures, skeletal and gleaming, rose from their ages-long slumber and resumed a war that had been paused, not ended, longer ago than most civilizations can conceive. This is the story of the Necrons, a people who traded their flesh for immortality, and who are only now beginning to reclaim what they believe was always theirs. To understand the Necrons, one must first set aside every assumption about what makes a civilization ancient. The Imperium of Man counts its history in tens of thousands of years, and considers itself venerable beyond measure. The Necrons regard such a span the way an elder might regard the first faltering steps of a child. Their story does not begin in the age of humanity, nor even in the age of the Imperium's oldest rivals. It begins before the galaxy had settled into the shape it now holds, in an era so distant that the very stars visible in the night sky today had not yet been born. To speak of the Necrons is to speak of the galaxy's true prehistory, a period that history has come to call the War in Heaven. Before that war, before the Necrons existed in the form the galaxy now knows, there was a species called the Necrontyr. They were not machines, they were flesh and blood, mortal in every sense, and they lived upon a harsh, radiation-scoured world that offered them little comfort and less mercy. Their homeworld's dying sun bathed their planet in radiation intense enough to shorten every life dramatically, and the Necrontyr grew accustomed to existences measured in mere decades, their bodies frail, their skin prone to sickness. Their span on this world cut cruelly short before it had properly begun. Out of this hardship, however, came extraordinary ambition. Denied long life by nature, the Necrontyr resolved to seize it through invention, and their mastery of technology grew to rival and eventually surpass nearly every other civilization then living in the galaxy. The architect of that transformation was a Necrontyr named Sarek, a ruler whose ambition would come to define his entire species for the whole of its subsequent existence. Facing both the crushing might of the Old Ones and the slow biological death sentence of his own people's short lifespans, Sarek turned to an alliance that would prove the most consequential decision in Necrontyr history. He sought out the Citan, beings of near incomprehensible power who existed in their original state as vast entities of living energy, older even than the Old Ones themselves, and who had lain dormant across the galaxy for ages beyond counting. The Citan offered the Necrontyr what they most desired: an end to death, an end to frailty, an escape from the failing bodies that had defined their entire existence. In exchange, the Citan asked only for physical form, vessels through which their vast energies could act directly upon the material universe. It seemed to Sarek and to the Necrontyr leadership known as the Triarch an equitable bargain. It would prove to be a catastrophic one. Their early expansion brought them into contact with a species that would shape the entire remaining course of their history: the Old Ones. The Old Ones were, by every account preserved in fragments of Necron memory, the eldest and most powerful civilization the galaxy had yet produced, custodians of a network of powers scattered across countless worlds. They possessed mastery over the warp, that turbulent dimension of psychic energy underlying reality, and it was this very mastery that the Necrontyr came to covet and eventually to resent. When the Necrontyr sought access to worlds cultivated by the Old Ones, they were rebuffed, their requests dismissed by a civilization that regarded them as lesser. What followed was a war the Necrontyr could not win through conventional means, a war that would ultimately compel them toward a transformation so radical that it would erase their humanity entirely, in exchange for something they believed, at the time, to be victory. The process the Necrontyr underwent has come to be known as the biotransference, and it stands as one of the most consequential and haunting decisions in the galaxy's long history. Every Necrontyr, across their entire civilization, willingly transferred their consciousness from flesh into bodies of living metal, constructs engineered to be immune to sickness, injury, and the passage of time itself. In doing so, they achieved precisely what they had sought. They became immortal. But immortality, as it turned out, came at a cost that few among them had fully anticipated. The metal bodies they now inhabited stripped away the capacity for organic emotion. Personalities that had once been vibrant and individual grew cold, distant, and mechanical, mirroring the very forms their minds now occupied. Worse still, the Citan, freed from their dormant slumber and granted physical form through Necrontyr sacrifice, revealed an appetite for domination that the Necrontyr, now called the Necrons, were in no position to resist. The Citan enslaved their former allies, shattering the Necrons into servile castes, and turned this newly immortal, newly weaponized civilization against the old ones in a war that would consume the galaxy entire. That conflict, the War in Heaven, remains among the most significant and least understood periods in galactic history, precisely because so little of it survived to be recorded by any civilization that came afterward. What can be reconstructed suggests a war fought on a scale that dwarfs nearly every conflict that followed it. A struggle not merely between two armies, but between two fundamentally opposed visions of existence. The old ones fought with the aid of psychically gifted allies, races shaped and uplifted across countless worlds to serve as their instruments in the struggle. The Necrons, under the direction of the Citan, fought with tireless, undying legions and weapons capable of unraveling matter itself. For untold millennia, the war raged across the width of the galaxy, and by its end, both sides had been broken beyond recovery. The old ones were driven to near extinction, their great works left in ruin, their uplifted races scattered and leaderless. The Necrons, though victorious in the narrowest sense, found themselves masters of a galaxy stripped of nearly everything worth possessing, their own people transformed into servants of tyrannical star gods, who cared nothing for the civilization that had given them form. It was in the aftermath of this hollow victory that the Necrons committed the act that would define the whole of their subsequent history. Recognizing that continued existence under the Citan's dominion offered nothing but endless servitude, the Necron leadership, still guided in part by the will of Sharek, turned upon their former masters. Through treachery, sacrifice, and a mastery of technology that even their own creators had not fully anticipated, the Necrons succeeded in destroying or shattering nearly every Citan into fragments. A process that stripped the star gods of their once total power and rendered them, at best, shadows of what they had been. It was a victory bought at almost unbearable cost, and by the time it was complete, the Necrons themselves were exhausted beyond measure. A civilization that had traded flesh for immortality, only to spend that immortality fighting first for their conquerors and then against them. Faced with a galaxy in ruins and a civilization with nothing left to conquer, the Necron leadership made a final, fateful decision. Rather than attempt to rebuild in a diminished galaxy, surrounded by younger, hungrier species beginning to rise in the wake of the old one's collapse, the vast majority of the Necron dynasties chose to enter a state of extended stasis, sealing themselves within great tomb complexes buried deep beneath the surface of their conquered worlds. There they would sleep, preserved and untouched by time, until a signal awakened them, or until the passage of ages itself triggered their return. Sarek, bearing the full weight of what his ambition had cost his people, is said to have departed the galaxy entirely, leaving his fractured empire behind to slumber through the long night that followed. And so, for 60 million years, the Necrons slept, while the galaxy above them changed beyond all recognition.
During that immense span of time, new civilizations rose that knew nothing of the war that had shaped the galaxy before them. The Eldar built their empire and, in time, fell to their own excess. Humanity emerged from a single world and, after passing through ages of darkness and rediscovery, built an empire of its own, spanning 1,000,000 worlds. None of them suspected what lay beneath the surfaces of so many seemingly dead planets. The tombs remained silent, their occupants dormant, their weapons and their war engines held in reserve, waiting for awakening that for most of those millions of years seemed as though it might never come.
That waking began gradually, then accelerated, as scattered tomb worlds across the galaxy began to stir, their internal chronometers finally reaching the thresholds set for them 60 million years before. Necron dynasties, each ruled by its own ancient lord or overlord, emerged from their long sleep to find a galaxy utterly transformed, populated by species they had never encountered and could scarcely be bothered to understand. Some dynasties emerged with their command structures intact and their forces well preserved, ready to resume their ancient claim to dominion over the stars. Others rose in far poorer condition, their tomb complexes damaged by time or by the depredations of the newer races who had settled unknowingly upon their surface. Their remaining forces reduced, their overlords forced to rebuild strength before they could contemplate conquest. What united nearly every dynasty, however, was the same underlying conviction, that the galaxy, in some fundamental sense, still belonged to them. Among the most storied of the dynasties to have reawakened is the Sautek dynasty, whose rise has proven the most consequential of the modern era. Under the leadership of an overlord who eventually claimed for himself the title of Silent King, the Sautek have pursued a strategy of consolidation and expansion that has seen them absorb the strength of neighboring dynasties, whether through alliance or outright conquest, forging what may become the first truly unified Necron power since the age before the Long Sleep. Their ambition is not merely to reclaim lost worlds, but to reunite the scattered remnants of an empire that fractured under the weight of its own catastrophic history, and in doing so, to restore something resembling the authority the Necrons once held over the entirety of the galaxy. Other dynasties have charted markedly different paths since their awakening. The Novok dynasty stands apart for its singular devotion to war for its own sake, its warriors driven by a battle hunger that borders on the ritualistic, seeking conflict wherever it can be found, rather than pursuing any coherent strategic design. The Nihilak dynasty, by contrast, has proven notably more cautious, its overlord favoring patient consolidation of a smaller domain over the reckless expansion pursued by more ambitious rivals, a strategy shaped by hard lessons learned from dynasties that overreached and were shattered for their ambition. The Mefrit dynasty has distinguished itself through its mastery of the galaxy's material resources, its forces built around a ruthless efficiency in the extraction and control of valuable worlds, treating conquest as much an economic enterprise as a military one. Each dynasty, shaped by its own history and its own surviving leadership, has emerged from stasis with a distinct character, and the relationships between them are rarely simple. Ancient rivalries, some predating the war in heaven itself, continue to shape alliances and conflicts among the Necrons even now, complicating any hope of the unified restoration that dynasties like the Sautek pursue. What makes the Necron threat so formidable in the present age is not merely their numbers, though those numbers remain staggering, nor merely their ancient grievances, though those grievances run deeper than any rival empire can claim. It is their technology, a body of scientific and engineering achievement that no other civilization currently active in the galaxy has managed to fully match, let alone surpass. Necron warriors, the basic soldiery of their armies, are constructs of near indestructible living metal, capable of self-repair on the battlefield, their bodies reassembling from catastrophic damage in ways that defy conventional notions of mortality. Weapons that would obliterate any organic soldier outright often serve only to inconvenience a Necron warrior, whose systems reconstitute themselves and return the creature to combat within moments. Their gas weaponry operates on principles that strip matter away at the atomic level, reducing armor and flesh alike to component particles, rather than simply piercing or burning them. Their war engines, from towering monoliths capable of serving as mobile fortresses to colossal constructs bearing weapons that unravel reality at the point of impact, represent engineering so far beyond the comprehension of most rival civilizations that entire branches of imperial science exist solely to study fragments recovered from Necron battlefields, with only limited success. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the Necrons' relationship with death itself, or rather, their apparent transcendence of it. A Necron warrior destroyed in battle does not simply cease to exist. Its consciousness, or what remains of it after the biotransference stripped away so much of its original nature, can often be recovered and its body reconstructed, so long as the necessary technology and resources remain available to its dynasty. Necron overlords who have fallen in battle have, on more than one documented occasion, returned to lead their forces again, their forms rebuilt, their strategic memory intact, as though death for them were merely an inconvenience to be corrected rather than a final and irreversible event. This capacity, more than any single weapon or war engine, is what causes Imperial commanders to regard the Necrons with a particular and specific dread. An enemy that can be worn down through attrition is an enemy that can eventually be defeated. An enemy that does not remain worn down presents a far more difficult problem. And yet, for all their power, the Necrons who walk the galaxy today are not the civilization that fought the war in heaven at the height of its strength. 60 million years of dormancy have taken their toll in ways that even their engineering could not entirely prevent. Many dynasties awakened to find their tomb complexes damaged, their subordinate constructs corrupted or malfunctioning after millions of years without maintenance, their overlords themselves afflicted by a slow creeping degradation of memory and personality that Necron scholars have come to call the stasis sickness. Entire dynasties have been lost to this affliction, their overlords descending into mindless savagery, their once disciplined legions reduced to feral automatons, driven by nothing more than a base and unthinking hunger for destruction. Even the Sautek dynasty, for all its successes in reunification, commands only a fraction of the total strength the Necrons once wielded at the height of their empire, and the work of restoring what was lost proceeds slowly, dynasty by dynasty, tomb world by tomb world, against a galaxy far more crowded and far more dangerous than the one they departed so long ago. The Necrons' current situation, then, is one of ongoing and uncertain resurgence. They are neither the unstoppable conquerors of their ancient prime, nor the harmless relics that some among the younger races once mistook them for in the earliest days after their reawakening. They are something more complicated, an empire attempting to remember what it once was, ruled by beings who traded away their humanity for a form of immortality that has proven over the ages to be a considerably heavier burden than Sarek and his Triarch ever anticipated. Some dynasties press outward with genuine ambition, seeking to restore Necron dominion across worlds now held by empires that never knew the Necrons existed. Others remain content within the boundaries of their own reclaimed territories, wary of a wider galaxy that has grown far more dangerous and far more crowded with rival powers than it was in the age before the long sleep began. What remains certain, across every dynasty and every surviving fragment of their once unified empire, is the depth of the claim the Necrons hold to this galaxy, a claim rooted not in recent conquest, but in a history that predates every other power currently contesting the stars. Long before the Imperium rose from humanity's ashes, long before the Eldar built their glittering empire and lost it to their own excess, the Necrons fought and bled in their own fashion for dominion over this galaxy, and paid a price for that dominion that few other civilizations could survive intact. Whether they will ultimately succeed in reclaiming what they lost, or whether the long centuries of sleep have cost them something that even their extraordinary technology cannot restore, remains a question that only the passage of further ages will answer. For now, across 1,000 worlds and more, the tombs continue to open, and the ancient dynasties continue to rise, patient in a way that only the truly immortal can afford to be.